We'll do it live.
Okay.
We'll do it live.
Well, friends and neighbors, hi. Thanks for joining me. Like it says, we'll do it live. We are scheduled to be talking to Bill Meltzer and Mike Augello of Hockey Hot Stove, who is once again partnering with this year's Hockey Day in Houston. Bill is the Flyers contributor and chief operating officer of the site, and Michael is the Leafs contributor and chief content officer for Hockey Hot Stove. But they're not in right now. So we're going to wait for them, and it's totally cool because, hey, you're here, right? Astroworld emerges as potential NHL arena site, and I got to tell you, I mean, anything's possible, right? But I don't see it happening here. And the reason I don't see it happening is we've seen the Texans are looking to get out of this area. The rodeo's looking to get out of this area. So why would the NHL want to go into that old Astroworld site? So I'm looking at this and I'm just going, nah, I don't think so. So anyway, we'll see what winds up happening. We got Mike here with us from Hockey Hot Stove. And yeah, let's go ahead and welcome him in, shall we? Let's see here. Mike, how are you, sir?
Matt, good to talk to you. It's a summer evening, and you know when you're a hockey reporter and a hockey website runner, the late July, early August is sort of like Death Valley. So I'm like looking forward to September when all the news starts again.
Right. So did we take you away from anything? Was there some big scoop?
No.
Okay.
No,
all right.
No. Just finished dinner, and now I'm ready to talk some hockey.
Cool. I'm noticing a bass guitar in your background there.
Yes, there are. Well, no, there are two bass guitars. There's a Gibson Thunderbird and a Rickenbacker, and on this side there is a Fender Jazz and a Fender Precision.
Oh, we have so much to discuss. However, this is a hockey theme show. So
yes.
At any rate, I figure the place to start is because I talk about Houston potentially to the NHL. That's all I've talked about for a little over a year now. So let's talk about you and your site.
Okay.
Because I'm not sure, because it wasn't obvious to me. How about that? That people understand what Hockey Hot Stove is. It's not just a podcast, and it's not just a column. The way I've described it is it's an umbrella that covers all 32 teams. You got blogs and fan forums for all 32 teams. And you got, it looks like about a dozen different podcasts for different teams and different niches. And I dig the niches because you got like hockey parents and you got female fans and stuff like that. So do I have the details on your platform right first?
Yeah, no, we as well as trying to have as many. And as a startup, we're into our second year, and I think we're doing pretty well. But like any website, we're accumulating writers. We have about, I'd say, 10 to 12 markets covered, and when there's something big in the NHL happening, Bill Meltzer and I will write about that. But we're building a staff basically, but we also have assembled sort of a podcast network. Where they're loosely affiliated to the website, but we provide them a platform. A couple of them, actually, like 3 or 4 of them, I either appear as a guest or as a co-host. Off the Post Radio, which has Russ Cohen, Anthony Mangione, myself, and Leafs Convo, and I guest on the Ladies Talking Leafs podcast as their insider. So I do podcasts for the hockey news because I cover the Buffalo Sabres for the hockey news. So yeah, I mean we're growing, and we had our best month of our existence in July, which of course July is when everything happens in the NHL. And yeah, no, I love it, and I think we're going places.
All right. Well, cool. It seems cool. I want to point something out that I noticed about your site when I went poking around there the other day. Like, I've been there a couple of times, but specifically for this, I noticed, if this thing pulls up, let's see what we got. There we go.
Mhm.
I noticed you have all 32 teams up there.
Right.
But the thing that caught my eye is you got 11 columns, 3 rows, almost like you deliberately made room for that 33rd team there. When Bettman made his expansion announcement, were you the least bit surprised?
Oh, I there's, it's just really, it's going to happen. It's just a question of how many. I think that, especially, you've heard Bettman talking about the fact that, he's setting the market price at $2 billion for a franchise. You got to remember, the money is not part of hockey related revenue. It's going to go into the pockets of the owners. So, yeah, the 32 owners want $2 billion divided by 32, and by and more than one. So my theory has been, and this is not based on any kind of inside source, but I think the way that they're going to do it is that they're going to expand by 4 teams in stages. They'll expand 2 in the first expansion, and then 2 more. And I think it's going to go west east for both. So then after you have 36, and you're going to have 3 divisions of 6 teams and 18 teams in each conference. So now I don't know what that's going to mean in terms of the balancing of the schedule, because with the 84 game season, now you're playing your division 4 times. You're playing, I think it's 3 times inside your conference and then 2 in the other conference. That's going to get jumbled up if you add 4 more teams, but I don't think they're going to care when they're making that kind of money. So that's where I think they're going. And to your point about Houston, I would be dumbfounded if Houston isn't one. I think the first expansion is going to be Atlanta in the East and Houston in the West.
That's what I'm thinking too. I used to watch Atlanta with jealousy because they're at least announcing plans. And suddenly overnight almost, it's like we overtook them. And I don't understand how NHL media works clearly, but okay, I'll allow it. I've been wanting this for a while. What's interesting to me about Bettman's comments about the expansion fee is, number one, it's not 2 billion, it's 3.5, because you got to build that new arena and everything else. Right. But what amuses me about that is Bettman saying, well, the owners, keep in mind they'll have to share revenue with another team, and I agree with you, Mike, 4 teams. They'll have to share revenue with 4 new teams. So I don't know about this expansion. Well, no, obviously, who doesn't want a piece of $2 billion? That's ridiculous. So, okay. Let's talk. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, one thing, because if I'm correct in recalling, when they expanded and brought Seattle in, Vegas did not get a share because they were an expansion team. So I believe the 31 existing teams got a share. The owners of the 31 existing teams got a share, and Bill Foley did not. So I don't know whether, like, say, for example, if they expand by 2 and then it's 34 and then they expand to 36, I don't think the 2 expansion teams are going to get a chunk of the pie. That's going to the existing owners. But to your point about building a building, I'll yield to your expertise when it comes to what's going to happen in Houston. I've heard with Atlanta, the failing of the Atlanta franchise in the 2 instances. It was the Omni in Atlanta where the Flames played, and I'm old enough to remember that. And then it was the Phillips Arena, and both of them were downtown. So now I think what the plan is that they're going to build the new arena, if Atlanta does get a franchise, in suburban Atlanta, not outside of the city. And I guess that's worked for the Atlanta Braves. So they think that this will work because, I mean, I know a lot of hockey people don't want Atlanta to get a third crack at it, but I think they're going to because they're a major TV market, which is the reason why I think Houston is going to get another crack at it, because it is a top 10 TV market, and why I think eventually, if they ever get their head out of their that they're going to go back to Phoenix. They're going to go back to Arizona.
Yeah, that's my prediction for the next three. I want to talk about who you think franchise 36 is later, because everyone's got a different idea on that. But I do want to talk especially about Houston,
Okay.
because you guys are partnering once again with Hockey Day in Houston, and thanks, because it's nice to have. It's one thing for when Houston says, yeah, we're a hockey town, and we tell each other we're a hockey town. But when outside sources go, yeah, we agree, that's cool. So around here, we've been saying Houston is a hockey town. It's a statement that was said in the 70s with the World Hockey Association, the Gordie Howe arrows, when the Howe brothers came back to Houston for the 50th anniversary of those cup wins to celebrate those. They repeated, Houston is a hockey town. So I know why I believe that, and the Houston faithful believe that. What is it about Houston that warrants y'all's interest in us as a hockey market?
Well, it's funny because I think Houston is a hockey market because so many people from the Northeast have moved to Houston. I know two friends who have moved from the Buffalo area because of, jobs, have moved to Houston. And I talk to them all the time, and they're like, they love an NHL team there because, one of them is a Sabres fan, but they would go to Houston games if there was, and they'd go to other games. So I think that the diaspora of people from the Northeast where hockey is the strongest, going to Houston is one positive. And like I said, being a top 10 TV market is big for the NHL. That's, like I said, that's why I think, they were dragged kicking and screaming out of Phoenix. They did not want to move, but the ownership was so horrendous that they had and they could never get a building built. I had friends who lived in Phoenix, and they lived in Scottsdale, which was outside of Phoenix, and the building was built in Glendale. And most of the hockey fans were in Scottsdale. You had to go through the city of Phoenix to get to Glendale at rush hour. So it was a complete disaster. And then they never were able to build a building just for a hockey team. It had always had to be tied to some, $1 billion real estate deal. And it was like sort of the shell game. I don't think that's going to happen in Houston. I mean, from what I understand, they're going to build their own building, but maybe they partner with the Rockets for a few years and play there until they build their building, depending on how long they have to wait. I don't know the logistics of that, but I think it can work. I think they'll probably, I can't see why the owner of the Rockets would not want rent from a team for 2 or 3 years. It's more money for him, but I'll yield to your expertise on that.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be at the Toyota Center where our Rockets play. But there's enough people saying, well, hey, this is a possibility, yourself included. I'm happy to be wrong. Let's just get a team here. But I keep reading that they're looking at 2029, 2030 to be the start for the expansion team. In the modern era, it takes about 2.5 years to build an arena.
Right.
I can't see it happening, but if it does, when my listeners point at me and go, aha, you were wrong about that, I don't care. We have the NHL. However that happens, hook or by crook, it's fine. So speaking of us getting a team, we have been, in my mind, next in line since the 79 merger. I think. And you mentioned Seattle's expansion earlier, which interesting point about Vegas not getting a share of that. And I hadn't even thought about that. I am of the opinion that Seattle got that team because Houston wasn't available, but who knows what's true or what's not. But we've been next in line forever, and we've been the leverage city for franchises to hold over their city governments to say, hey, build us this or we'll move to Houston. And it's happened at least twice that I'm aware of. And now we're pitted against Austin in this competition that doesn't really seem like it's a competition, but okay. I see Austin as a genuine threat. A lot of other people around here are like, nah, they're being used for leverage. That includes Austin's press is saying, nah, they're just using us for leverage. I don't know. This competition is unusual because we've had competitions before, like when Vegas beat out Quebec. This one's different in that we have the same owner, and now either the NHL or that owner or some combination of the two are picking between two cities. So, with all of that, do you think our time has finally come, or are we going to be sitting in the sidelines going, we barely missed it again?
The only case that can be made for Austin over Houston is that, Houston has the Astros, has the Rockets, has the Texans, and that the NHL team would conceivably be fourth at the trough. Whereas in Austin, who are they battling? The Texas Stars. I mean, there's nothing in terms of a pro franchise there. But again, I know Austin is growing by leaps and bounds. They've benefited from, the diaspora again from Southern and Northern California, and from the Northeast. It's in terms of it's sort of a liberal enclave in a conservative state, not to get political, but they it's growing by leaps and bounds. So I mean that's attractive to the NHL, but I do think that Houston is more attractive in the sense that if you're driving a television contract, whether it's with ESPN or Amazon or Apple or whatever you're going to do, to say that you're in Houston rather than Austin, I think is more attractive. That's why in the end, I think it's going to be Houston instead of Austin.
It's interesting that you say that because I keep hearing, at least locally, that Houston has more prestige than Austin does. And I don't know, do franchise owners really care which city is coming into their building? Let me rephrase, because I understand that like when the Capitals come to your building, everyone wants to see Ovi, but like, does it matter if it's Columbus or Cincinnati? Does it matter if it's Austin or Houston? Does that prestige really make a difference?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really transient because I think, like you said, if it's Ovechkin and it's Washington, I mean, if Ovechkin was on Ottawa, then people would go to see Ottawa. Who wants to see Connor McDavid? Great. Yeah, it doesn't matter that he's with Edmonton instead of, say, Toronto or Los Angeles or New York, where he's probably going to end up in 2 years. Yeah, they go to see McDavid. They don't go to see the Oilers. But I do think that the Florida Panthers will draw all over the league. Why? Because they're the Charlestown Chiefs of the modern era. They're going to be a goon squad with the Kachuk brothers and Radko Gudas and all those guys, and they're going to be the most hated team in every building that they're in. So I think there's the individual attractiveness of teams, and I think then there's the team concept of teams. So I think it can be either way.
I love the Charlestown Chiefs analogy for the Panthers. I think you're fantastic. Well done, sir. Okay, so we mentioned that we're getting a new arena, or Austin if they wind up winning this. Yeah, since we mentioned that competition though, real quick, someone mentioned an insider's like, well, I think it's 90% Houston. A couple of insiders had said, oh, it's a done deal. It's Houston. I don't know. After getting burned a couple of times, when I hear it's 90% Houston, I'm like, that still leaves 10% for us to blow it. So,
yeah.
But anyway,
it's a done deal when it's a done deal.
Exactly. I'm not going to start partying every time I read a headline. I want to wait for the announcement and then I'll start partying. But anywho, someone's getting a new arena. Mm-hmm. When Seattle came in, they had to completely modify the Sonics old arena,
the Key
Arena to make what's now Climate Pledge, and they gave it NHL sight lines, and they basically rebuilt it from the ground up. Mm-hmm. Vegas built T-Mobile Arena, the new arena, NHL sight lines. what are some things, because people keep saying, well, why not Toyota Center? Well, if it's temporary or not, what are some things, some architectural fan experience features of a modern NHL arena that people here might not realize is a thing in other NHL towns? What should we expect to see in a new arena for the new Texas franchise?
Well, I can just say this, and the most glaring example of this was the Barclays Center and with the Islanders when they moved out of Nassau Coliseum, and that was a building built for the Brooklyn Nets, and that had NBA sightlines, meaning the shape of the NBA arena, the NBA floor, and the sight lines that accommodate it are different than an NHL arena. And at Barclays, I mean, there were seats that were not obstructed view, but you could only see like 3/4 of the ice, and that doesn't fly. That doesn't work. In Buffalo, before they had what's now KeyBank Center, the old auditorium in Buffalo, which I saw my first concert in, and I saw, my first Sabres games back in the day. They slapped an upper deck on an 8,000 seat arena to make it a 16,000 seat arena. And what they basically, what ended up happening is the seats in the lower bowl that were at the very end, you couldn't see the scoreboard. So they had TVs with the scoreboard on there so you could see what the score and the time of the game was. So there's all these little quirks, and like Chicago Stadium or Boston Garden, some of the older arenas, they had quirks. The Odd was a great place to see a game because that upper deck, you were hanging literally almost over the ice. So the view in the first row of the upper deck was probably better than some of the seats in the lower deck. So putting it in an NBA arena, it's a temporary fix. It can't be a permanent fix. That's why, like when I mentioned Arizona and them going back to Arizona, it probably would have to be along with probably the owner of the Phoenix Suns, I think it's Matt Ishbia, him buying an NHL expansion franchise and building a building for both the Suns and an Arizona team, or him building an arena that is dual capable for both hockey and basketball and has the sight lines that accommodate it. And I know the Air Canada Center, now Scotiabank Arena in Toronto, was originally being built just for the Raptors. And then the Leafs came in late in the process and they had to adjust some things to make it dual capable. So that's why, like, a new arena is probably a fait accompli. It has to be done for a Houston franchise, but they can get away with it for a couple years, 3 years or whatever, if they decide to, if that's the timeline that they have to do. If that could work, but as a long-term fix, I don't think it works.
Yeah, I'm just of this belief that after Muller Arena, after Phoenix, that the NHL is just allergic to the word temporary.
Right.
I can't imagine them wanting to do something, but money talks, and it could very well be if Freakin pulls up with $3.5 billion and says, we're not ready yet, can we have another couple of years?
Yeah, but we're talking the difference between a temporary, 18,000 seat arena at the Toyota Center and a 3,000 seat college arena with Mullet. And that was a cluster F. And yes, it was a cluster F because the owner was clueless and because the NHL were basically being dragged kicking and screaming out of Arizona. They didn't want to move to Salt Lake City, but in the end, they didn't have any option because that owner was a crook.
Yeah, I get their different things, but I'm just like, I would think that they're shell shocked, but maybe not. We'll see. So speaking of that $3.5 billion payout, I'm seeing some things. Man, some of the media is just outrageous, and I've seen a couple of sites that are doing prediction expansion drafts and mock expansion drafts. And I'm like, man, you can't be serious. We're nowhere close to this. But there will be an expansion draft at some point. You would think for $3.5 billion that Dan Friedkin, our franchise owner, would want a favorable draft like Vegas had, like Seattle didn't have just because of dumb luck, but okay, fine. But
dumb luck, and the league was wise to the mistakes that were made with Vegas. Nobody was cutting deals, giving Jonathan Marchessault to take Riley Smith from Florida, those type of things. That time around, they basically said, hey, you want to take this guy? Take this guy. You know, there were very few side deals made, and Seattle has suffered for it. I mean, they made the playoffs and they won a round against the incumbent Stanley Cup champions, but they're not the team that Vegas is, because I don't think they have an owner that says, well, I'll keep my comments about Bill Foley private.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. I figured you were going to conclude that sentence with aggressive, but okay, that works too. No comment is also a comment. So speaking of that expansion, though, do franchises, because you cover between your Sabres and your Leafs coverage, do franchises dread expansion, or do they see this as an opportunity to unload salaries?
I don't think they dread expansion, and I think the fact that it waters down the fan or the talent base. I mean, I haven't noticed any appreciable decline in the level of play with the addition of a 31st and 32nd team. I remember when the league was 21 teams, in the late 70s and early 80s, and and then it's slowly increased to now 32. And I think the game in some aspects has gotten better, and they're tapping into not only you have the Canadian market in terms of producing a bulk of the league's players. Now the United States is really growing as a hockey power, as witnessed what they have done at the World Juniors and at the Olympics and at the World Championships. But now you have hockey countries like Norway and Germany giving Switzerland, Sweden, and Finland a run for their money. And Russia, obviously, once the Ukraine war ends and they are allowed back into the IIHF, they'll be starting to flex their muscles in terms of being a hockey power. So it's truly an international game now, and I think these teams are scouting all over the place. So if the league gets to 34 or 36 teams, I don't think there's going to be any kind of dilution of the talent. But I do, I think like teams like, say, Toronto, a traditional franchise, I don't think they care whether Utah is coming to town or whether Houston is coming to town. They're rooting for the Leafs, and they're just wanting to beat on the team that come into Toronto. So I don't think they care one way or the other.
Well, as you were giving us that take, Bill Meltzer has joined us, who covers the Flyers and is chief. I have it in my other page of notes. Chief. All right, that works for me. Of hockey.
That's good by me.
The grand poobah of the Royal Order of Water Buffaloes. If anybody watches.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I
yes.
Yeah, I think you've aged the room here. So, all right. So, Bill, I'm glad you joined us. Thanks for coming on, and you're hitting.
Happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. You're coming at an interesting time because I think having both of your expertise here on this next question here, because you've both seen the inner workings of NHL franchises up close. What should we be looking for? What is the biggest early indicator a new team can have that's a sign of future success or failure?
I would personally say, I think you would want to start with a scouting department that has a track record of success. Look at who they've added, in their past background. I don't like when you have an organization that's just basically an old boys club, you know, too many guys who played with the guy before, or they've worked together before. Really want to put together the best possible staff. And then the other part of it too is obviously you look at the other infrastructure things too. What kind of an arena do you get? You know, that kind of things too, because those things that also portend, of course, getting the team in the first place, but also in attracting players in, and then and then from there, just trying to have a sense of this is a team with a good game plan for when you go into an expansion draft.
Sounds good. Okay. Michael, thoughts or?
Yeah, I think the most important thing for an expansion franchise is to hire a general manager that has a focus on scouting and player development, because you look at, okay, I mean, Vegas was an outlier because Vegas, they had 3 first-round picks in their first year, and I think they traded all of them. They had Nick Suzuki, they had Cody Glass, and they had one other player who they ended up trading within a couple years. So they operated in a different way than, say, Seattle did by drafting Matty Beniers, who won Rookie of the Year, and drafting Shane Wright. But I don't think they've done a great job in developing those young players. They had high picks, but they didn't develop them well. And I think if you're an expansion team, you're going to finish at the bottom. More than likely, you're going to finish in the bottom of the standings, and you're going to have top 5 picks for 2 or 3 years. You need to hit on those picks. So you need a general manager and a scouting director who recognize talent, and a organization that can can not only draft but develop those players. Don't rush them into the NHL as an 18-year-old. Let them cook for a couple years in junior or in college, and then come into the NHL as a more fully formed adult. And if you do that, I think you improve your chances of being a viable and a successful franchise.
How about the opposite direction? Anything that we see early on that we should just go, okay, brace yourself. This is going to be, to use your word from earlier, Michael, a cluster F. What should we be watching out for that if we see it, oh no, this is not a good sign of things to come?
If you've hired Mike Babcock as your head, oh no, no. I mean, I think one warning sign is if you hire a veteran head coach and your marching orders are to be successful right away. I mean, Seattle wanted it to be that way because Vegas ruined it for everybody. Vegas made the Stanley Cup final as an expansion franchise. Nobody expected that to happen. But they ruined it for everybody else, because now every other expansion team says, well, we should be able to make the Stanley Cup final. That's not realistic. That was like a 1 in 1,000 shot. So,
and and I think the other part of it too is that I think a big mistake that established franchises make is they're trying to win the Stanley Cup from a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. You're trying to copycat what's been successful. Well, things are always shifting, right? And I think one of the mistakes sometimes in expansion, you can't go back and recreate what Vegas did, because other teams are savvy now to how they were actually. I thought Vegas did a tremendous job. Have to give them credit for it in how they were able to leverage. Okay, we won't pick so and so. We want this asset in return, right? Or we will take so and so, take a bad contract off your hands, knowing it's a guy who's going to walk relatively, or you're going to flip him. You'll flip him and get a good young piece, or even a veteran piece in return. That's not going to work a second time. I think other teams have a better game plan for how to approach an expansion draft, and look at the guys the teams expose. I mean, one of the things that and I do have to give Seattle some credit for this too. I'll give you an example. Now at this point, this I guess has ultimately worked out because he's won a Stanley Cup, but Philadelphia was dangling Shane Gostisbehere. It was an awful contract at the time, and I think a team without lacking a game plan will go, okay, well, this is a guy who's been a 60-point defenseman. He's still relatively young. Well, why isn't he protected, and why was this guy actually waived a few months ago and unclaimed? Sometimes one of the two big questions, and it's actually I'll tell you who told me this. Paul Stewart, who's a USA Hockey Hall of Famer, was a referee, was a player in the NHL, and actually was in management for the Boston Bruins for a little while too. He said, one of the biggest mistakes that franchises make, or rules committees or anything, is they go, okay, why should we do this, right? But they never ask, why shouldn't we do this? And sometimes the list of reasons for not doing something, what might be the consequences of something, sometimes that actually outweighs it. So you really have to weigh both sides of it. And I think a bad approach would be one where you're claiming a guy who might not be with you in a couple of years, who's bounced around a little bit, although he might have had some scoring success or whatever. I think you also have to have an identity in mind. It's not just like grab this name, that name. So really, it has to be very systematic in how you put a team together. And that's why I really think, and I agree with Mike, your choice of general manager right at the top is absolutely critical. I want somebody with probably a guy who's like run a farm system and had some success in building some depth within the system that might not show up at the NHL level immediately, but over a couple of years would start to bear some
And
fruit.
the two expansion teams are the perfect example of that. You had George McPhee as the original general manager in Vegas, and he was a longtime general manager in Washington, and knew the league and knew the people, and operated accordingly. And he had success in Washington. He never won a Stanley Cup there, but he had success, and he was thought of as a good general manager. And then you had Ron Francis in Seattle, who didn't make the playoffs in Carolina as a general manager. And, he succeeded in making the playoffs in Seattle, but they sort of stagnated for his term there as GM. And now they have Jason Botterill there. And I think he's probably better than Francis, but now you have a problem of nobody wants to go there. Like Jason Robertson said, $15 million. No, I don't want to go to Seattle. And they have the benefits that, I know there's a millionaire's tax, but Washington State was a relatively low state tax. And that's going to be an advantage for Houston in terms of accelerating their build. Is players are going to want to go there because they go to Dallas, Nashville, Florida, Tampa, Vegas, no tax states. And now apparently Missouri is going to be that way too. So the St. Louis Blues are now going to be a destination in a few years. So, that's a key for attracting players.
Interesting. I didn't know that about Missouri. All right.
It just happened today, I think.
Did it? Okay. Well, Bill, Michael, and I were talking earlier, and we were talking about expansion, and I got Houston penciled in as 33. We both said the same thing, that they're probably going to get up to 36. And tell me if you agree with this. It's probably going to be Houston, Atlanta, Phoenix. Does that jive with your thinking as well?
For sure. Houston definitely. Gary Bettman seems hell-bent on trying a third time in Atlanta. So I think there's a pretty darn good chance Atlanta. And I think maybe you start by adding one more in the West, which would be Houston, one more in the East, which would be Atlanta, and then then another expansion, not immediately, but a couple of years further down the line. Certainly, I mean, they need to learn but with Phoenix, I mean, they ended up with the league owning them. It was just constant headaches with an arena, all of that. I mean, all of that is going to have to be figured out proactively. Honestly, with Houston, one of the big challenges will be getting the new facility built, because that's going to be a prerequisite. Now, on the other hand, building a facility is not a guarantee. Ask the poor folks in Quebec, right? They have an arena and they have no team.
Yeah,
even going further back than that, when Kansas City built buildings, and there was that. Before Houston, it was Kansas. Well, we'll just move to Kansas City. It's like there's no, the Kansas City Scouts were a real big success, weren't they? I mean, so were the. I mean, that doesn't mean that the Colorado Rockies were a disaster. Now the Avalanche have been good, but the NHL has. That's why I'm sort of against Atlanta, because they've had two kicks at the can. They're going back there, so there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, my pet theory here is that Bettman wants to smooth over those. I think mistakes is too strong of a word, but he wants to smooth over the cities that didn't work out before he exits. So that leaves us with a fourth team, gentlemen. Does Quebec City get passed by again?
Not a chance.
No,
No,
I don't think Gary Bettman was another franchise in Canada. I
well,
don't.
okay. No, I do think he would, but I'll explain in a second. The Quebec City does not have the corporate base, does not have the population base that the NHL wants. The Canadian dollar is at 1/3. It's at 35%. So the Canadian dollar is weak. I agree with Bill. I don't think he wants to add another Canadian franchise unless it was a second team in Toronto. That's not going to happen. Rogers will assemble an assassination team for Gary Bettman if he tried to muscle a second team in Toronto. If you go west east and it's Atlanta, Houston in the first round, and then it's Arizona in the second round, I would say you're going to hear cities like Cleveland, maybe Charlotte. You could maybe make a case for a Memphis, but I think that's reaching because out there's any kind of hockey
In Tennessee.
Yeah. So, but Charlotte's is a big team, and you could have Charlotte and Raleigh in the same division, and that would fit with the Florida teams and Atlanta. So, and Bill, I said, when they expand to 36, you're going to have 3 divisions of 6 teams. That's what it's going to.
Yes.
It's going to be. It's going to be a northeast, an east, and a southeast, and then west, central, and whatever. So, that's probably what it's going to end up being.
Yeah. Bill, your thoughts? What do you think?
Well, I'm trying to rack my brain as to who would be the logical other city. Hartford had a big following. It's a very small market, but Hartford had a really loyal following there. The reason why they ended up moving to Carolina was not lack of support, but that was a franchise. It's funny. I mean, a lot of people still lament the loss of the Whalers, but identifying other cities. That's why Houston's such an obvious one. Atlanta's such a big market. Bill,
I think that Cleveland makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. It's like rivalry with Columbus, rivalry with Pittsburgh, rivalry with Buffalo. Fairly sizable population base, bigger than Buffalo. The Lake Erie Monsters, or now Cleveland Monsters, have been a successful AHL franchise. Now, the Cleveland Barons were an unmitigated disaster, but that was the Gunn brothers and their ownership that, then they moved, moved them, or then it sort of moved and morphed into the Minnesota North Stars, and then they were part of the expansion with San Jose. So that went all over the place. But I think it might be time to give Cleveland another kick at the can. I mean, I don't see anybody other than Charlotte. I don't see an extremely obvious Eastern expansion.
Yeah, and they have some of the history background too. I mean, back when there was a WHA, actually the Stingers were actually one of the actual profitable franchises in the league. There weren't a lot of profitable franchises, but Cleveland actually had one at that time.
That makes me think Indianapolis, because Indianapolis had a WHA franchise.
Yeah. Some little pipsqueak named Gretzky played there.
Oh, yeah. How about that? That guy.
9 in his uniform. Yeah.
But see, the thing is, Indianapolis and Milwaukee, which I think is another.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could put them, say that they're central more than they are east.
Mm-hmm.
I think you really have to get that team into an Eastern time zone. So. And to have rivalries with teams in the East. So, that's why I think it's probably going to be like a Cleveland or a Charlotte.
Cleveland makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you so much for just, outside of Houston, talking to Houston, we appreciate that the rest of the country's paying it, or rest of the continent's paying attention to our sleepy little town here. If people want to follow you guys and want to catch Flyers, Leafs, broader NHL coverage, how do they go about doing that?
You can find us on hockeyhotstove.com. In addition to Hockey Hot Stove, I'm the Flyers internal beat writer on PhiladelphiaFlyers.com, which is the Flyers official website. I'm also the Flyers Alumni Association's content manager. So that's FlyerSalumni.net. And let me just close in saying this, that cannot wait for Hockey Day in Houston. 2027 had a fantastic time this year. Next year, we're going to take my wife and kids along.
Oh, cool. Okay.
A lot of fun.
Lots of stuff for kids at Hockey Day. All right.
I'm living.
Mike, how do people follow your coverage there?
Mike in Buffalo on Twitter. That was my handle when I was a caller to Toronto sports radio, which basically doesn't exist anymore. That's how old I am. Cover the Buffalo Sabres for the Hockey News, cover the Maple Leafs for Hockey Hot Stove. And I think every day I host or co-host a podcast. So people get sick of my face on social media, but it's so handsome. So I don't know how to get sick of it.
The question is, are you sick of talking about hockey?
No.
Well,
I'll be talking about hockey after they put me in the grave.
That'll be an interesting trick. All right, gentlemen. So I'm going to close this out here, play my little intro, and I'll be with y'all in just a moment. Thanks so much for joining. Friends and neighbors.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We out.